Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm David Lurie. I'm calling this segment Court Vision for now. Uh, may or may not have been a name that I picked using ChatGPT, which tells you a bit about where my current creative process is at. But I have an awesome topic to talk about today. So the idea stems from the NBA discourse we've all been hearing over the years. Is LeBron James the greatest player of all time? Have Steph or KD made it into the top 10? In my opinion, those debates have become a bit stale. Feels like we've really driven them into the ground. And I think looking at this current NBA season and at the top of the standings, it's a great time to kind of look at that conversation from a different lens. If you look at the top of the standings, all of the best teams are led by what I would call this new generation of NBA superstars, the Jason Tatums, the Ja Morants, the Jokic's. And so given where we're at in this current iteration of the league, I thought it'd be a good exercise to go through and kind of project where those players may reach from an all-time standpoint when their careers are all said and done. So if you haven't read the article that I published, I posted it on click.substack.com, clic.substack.com. I wrote it on this topic, but to add a little more flavor to the conversation today, I wanted to bring on my friend and co-host, John Iezzi, kind of talk about where we aligned, where we differed. It's also been a month since I wrote the article, so a lot of things have happened across the NBA landscape in that time that I think will add some more perspective to the article. But before I bring him on, just kind of going quickly through the ground rules here. I'm only going to be talking about, or we're only going to be talking about players that are 28 or younger and that have made at least one first or second team All NBA appearance. So that's a small list. That's Giannis, Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, Ja Morant, Jason Tatum, Luka Doncic, and Devin Booker. And then as far as the projection side of things, for the article, I use the pyramid framework from Bill Simmons's The Book of Basketball, where he essentially grouped his top 100 players of all times into 5 tiers. Those tiers are as follows. So you have level 1, which are just made it into the Hall of Fame type of players. Think like Ray Allen, Reggie Miller, Pau Gasol. Level 2 are no doubt about it Hall of Famers who either never won anything during their primes, never peaked as like a top 5 player, or were overshadowed by others at their position. So think like Paul Pierce, Clyde Drexler, maybe Dwight Howard, that type of player. Then getting into level 3, this is where we get to the no doubt about it Hall of Famers who did consistently rank amongst the best of their positions year over year. Chris Paul, Steve Nash, Allen Iverson. Level 4 is very similar to level 3, but these are players with transcendent characteristics, be it a memorable playoff performance, unique play styles. So the guy that comes to mind for me for this level is Dirk Nowitzki. Maybe not the greatest of the great players, but an all-time great who had one of the most memorable championship runs in 2011. And then the highest level you can get to, level 5, is the Pantheon. So this is Michael Jordan, the LeBrons, Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, guys who the history of the league would be forever altered if they did not exist, right? They're synonymous with what the NBA is all about from a historical standpoint. So with that coming up next, my friend and co-host John Iezzi. Like I said, we're going to debate these projections. We're going to add a little more context given the recent happenings across the NBA landscape. So let's go.
What's up, man?
All right, John, how's it going, man? Good to see you.
Intro. That was
Thanks,
dope.
man.
That was
Appreciate
great.
it.
Yeah.
So we're going to debate my NBA young player ceiling projections today. Really interested to hear your opinions on these things. I hope you agree with kind of what I'm saying about what's happened in the league in the past month, right?
Yeah.
I think that hopefully we're going to be able to add some layers to the conversation that I started with the article that I wrote a month ago. But just to get right into it, I figured we could go in the same order that I went in my article, starting from the oldest to the youngest players that were covered from a projection standpoint. So you good with that?
Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, you're gonna kick it right off here, and already something happened about a week and a half ago that alters a little bit the conversation from these guys that we're going to talk about. But I'm excited to go
Yeah,
ahead and get started.
absolutely. So first up is Joel Embiid, who I actually think might be the most interesting player to talk about on the list that I had. So his resume: he's a 4-time second team All NBA member. He finished as MVP runner up in the past 2 seasons and may win MVP this year or be runner up again. You know, he's up there. He's averaging over 33 points a game this year, which is ridiculous. But he's never advanced out of the second round of the playoffs. So, John, is Joel Embiid destined for all-time greatness in your eyes?
I think that there's so much nuance that has to go into this conversation about Joel because, reading through your blurb about him and getting to the end where you had him ranked level 4, my initial impression and reaction was, where is his? It's like what I had written down in my notes was, while he's ultra talented, I don't think he's special. And you compared him in your article to Patrick Ewing. And I think that wasn't a comp that I had thought about, but it's a comp that after reading your piece made so much sense to me. And when you go back and look at Simmons's original pyramid, he had Ewing 40th. That was back in 2010. And we know that there's people that have surpassed him since then. Steph Curry is going to be above it. I believe Kevin Durant was below him in the initial pyramid. So that 40th was, he's only going to drop beyond that. But with Embiid, I contradict myself immediately by saying I don't think he's special. And then at the same time, he does things that nobody else on the planet can do. He does things that nobody of the last 15, 20 years has been capable of doing. And I wonder, when we're talking about ceiling, because of his age and because of his lack of pedigree in the playoffs to this point, it's hard to say that he's going to be able to get up into the top 20 to 25, 30 to me. But at the same time, his skill set and his unique traits might actually be that caliber of player.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of things that have happened in the past month, I thought his performance against Denver I think it was last weekend, is exactly why I put him at a level 4 ceiling. And that might not even be high enough. When you see him at that level, he looks like the premier player in the game. He's absolutely taking it to Jokic, the MVP favorite for the 3rd straight year. I mean, he was clowning him. He destroyed him. But at the same time, when you think about, who would you trust to carry a team night after night deep into the playoffs, I still feel like I'd lean Jokic, and I know we're going to talk about him more, but it's just because I haven't seen that dominant regular season version of Embiid in May, let alone June, right? And so when you think about like the Hakeem Olajuwon comparison for him, which I think gets thrown around a lot, like Hakeem's a 2-time champion, multi-time Defensive Player of the Year award winner. Embiid's been close, but to get to that level, to get to level 4, he needs the deep playoff run. He needs the championship, most likely, right? Otherwise, I think level 3 is a more likely landing spot for him. But do you feel like he can be the best player on a championship team? Because I do. It's just
I do. I feel like it's, in some respects, he's running out of time though, right? Like we know that bigs break down faster. And while he has more elements to his game than, somebody like Shaq, for example, there's so many other players in the league that I would feel more comfortable in saying, I think that this guy's more likely to bring a championship to a team than Embiid as we continue to progress in his career, whether that be, Giannis, who's already done it once, or other guys down this list that we're going to touch on eventually. I think that his window is now. If he's going to do it, we're going to see it this year, maybe next year. By the time he's 30 and beyond, it's hard for me to envision with the amount of talent that's in the league right now. If he's not able to do it in the next few seasons, it's hard for me to envision him being able to do it as the best player on a team.
Yeah, and he doesn't strike me as a guy who I would bet on having like this incredible level of durability, like well into his 30s. He's never played 70 games in a regular season. He kicked off his career by missing the first 2 seasons, of his career, right? He got hurt during the draft process, if I remember correctly. And I feel like in big games, he'll often, towards the end of the game, he'll kind of have his hands on his knees. He'll look exhausted, deep into the playoffs. We've seen that type of, that version of Embiid before. So can he overcome those kind of sore spots in his game? I feel like it's a mental thing with him more than like physical ability almost. And the other aspect with Embiid, though, is there is an angle to his career that, like, he's been very unlucky in a lot of ways. Not just the way he starts his career, being injured for 2 seasons, but like he probably lost on the most ridiculous Game 7 game winner we've ever seen, right? Kawhi's shot hits the rim 4 times, knocks Philly out of the playoffs. They might have been able to win the title that year. They had that terrible collapse against Atlanta, which he deserves partial blame for. He had the orbital bone fracture in the playoffs last year. So, it's like, and let alone he came in second to Jokic and like for 2 MVP races. We could be looking at a guy that already has a championship and 2 MVPs, but it just hasn't broken the right way for him.
I think touching on or comparing and contrasting to your comparison with Patrick Ewing, we were very young in Patrick Ewing's prime of his career. Either, we were just born or we were very early stages. And so all that we have to reference is either going back and looking at highlights or reading back on things. And I have this perspective of Patrick Ewing from my dad, right, who was in college at that time and who just talked about how dominating of a presence Patrick Ewing was. But at the end of the day, the dominating presence that he was, there was other people in the league for one reason or another who were just a little bit better. And we think if you were to have this conversation about Patrick Ewing in 1985 or 1992 or 1995, like where we are at or going to be soon in Joel Embiid's career, we may be having the exact same conversation. I think that Joel has the highest ceiling and the lowest floor of the people on this list in terms of where they ultimately fall in the all-time category, because we're still just early enough in his career that there is so many different ways that it could go. Whereas I feel like when we talk about Giannis, I know how I'm going to envision and think about Giannis's career moving into after he's done playing. With Joel, I could sit here and say this was one of the most dominating forces in the history of the NBA, and he led them to championships and he overcame those things. And yes, he was unlucky at the beginning of his career, but he was able to overcome that and produce this all-time great resume. I also feel like there's the flip side of that where you're right. Maybe his durability catches up to him or he continues to have bad luck. And we look back and say, what if he played in a different era? What if he had better teammates? What if he was able to get a couple luckier bounces? And I feel like that's how we talk about Patrick Ewing, or that's how people that are from that time in basketball that were really locked in talk about Patrick Ewing. And so to me, to agree with your overall premise when you started this conversation, Joel is maybe the most fascinating, interesting, unique, unplaceable person on this list.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think speaking of, players that we hold in a higher regard, I think we might as well just transition straight into the Giannis conversation.
Yeah.
So he's a 2-time MVP. He's won a championship. He's won a finals MVP. He's a 6-time All-NBA member, 4 first teams, 2 seconds. He's got a defensive player of the year on the resume. I mean, just as you just said, right? He's 28 and it feels like he's kind of already done it all. We already have a very clear picture of where he's going to be headed when it's all said and done. So is that final destination a top 10 player of all time, in your opinion?
If Shaquille O'Neal is considered to be a top 10 player of all time, then yes, I think that can be his ceiling. But if he's not, which, just following along with Bill Simmons's original pyramid, in his updated version of 2020, he had Shaq rated 13th. To me, that feels like a spot where I can see Giannis fitting in at the end of the day. He is modern version of Shaquille O'Neal. I'm sitting here laughing and chuckling, thinking about watching him play the other night against the Clippers. He had 2 points in the first quarter, 2 points. And at one point in the second half, the Clippers were beating them by 21 points. And Giannis just essentially said, screw it. I'm putting the team on my back. Chris Middleton is on a minutes restriction. Drew Holiday is shooting horribly, but it doesn't matter. I'm going to go win this game essentially by myself. He ends up scoring 54 points, I think it was, 54 out of the 106 that the Bucks scored in general. And they get a really good come from behind win against a team that up to that point had been playing awesome. And that's just kind of the entire Giannis experience to me. Giannis is the guy in the NBA right now who I would trust more than anyone else to put a team on his back, to be the best player on the floor night in, night out. I would choose him over anybody else that takes the court against him. And how can you not love the guy? How can you not root for the guy?
Yeah.
So to settle on that, like, to me, he's a tier 4 lock, a level 4 lock, the top aspects of level 4. And to me, he has the ability to rise above and beyond that. Because, whereas Shaq did have Kobe and D Wade to play with that helped him bring those championships, if we look back on Giannis 5 years from now and the guy's won 2 more titles and he's done it with lower level all-stars, but no other all-time greats surrounding him, we're going to have to begin talking about this guy at a really, really, really high tier, which would not surprise me, not out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah. It's the single hardest part about this whole projection exercise is we have no idea what teams, like what future teams these players might even be on, whether it's a different roster around Giannis in Milwaukee. Like Drew Holiday and Chris Middleton are quietly getting a little bit older. Drew Holiday still looks great. Middleton rounding back into form, but I think they're like 32 or 33 years old, both of them. So we don't know how much longer they're going to be like viable number 2 and number 3 options. If it's going to be in Milwaukee with that core, feels like it needs to be a championship this year, maybe next year. Beyond that, impossible to project. And like kind of going along with what you said about Embiid, and it's very hard to envision exactly how his career is going to play out. I think a lot of that's going to be, is he in Philly long term, or does he go to another team up with another great player that plays off him a little more efficiently, and that blows his whole career up like Shaq and Kobe, right? But I made a bold claim in my article regarding Giannis. I said I think he's already a top 20 player of all time today. Like if you ask me who was the more dominant player, Kevin Garnett or Giannis, like it's Giannis without question, right? And what he did in the 2021 finals against Phoenix, I actually don't think it gets talked about enough. I mean, we talk about it. I know that's the common phrase. It doesn't get talked about enough for things that like we all actually do talk about. But the Bucks-Suns series was it was a strange series, right? It was still kind of on the back half of the pandemic. It was a shortened season, a lot of injuries in that playoffs. But the fact is, when the chips were down in that finals, when the Bucks were down 2-0, Giannis took over in an absolutely legendary way. I mean, he had 3 unreal moments. He had the block on DeAndre Ayton in Game 4, the alley-oop to clinch the game in Game 5, and then a 50-piece to win the finals, the first finals for Milwaukee in 50 years. Like I said at kind of in the intro, Dirk had his legendary 2011 run, but like to me, Giannis's championship run is like right up there. So he's already done enough to, like you said, be a lock for level 4. It's just a matter of, can he get to like 3 championships like Shaq? Can he get to 3+ MVPs, 4+ MVPs, right? That's when we can really start having the conversation around, is he a top 10 guy?
If you just look at what he's doing this year, there's so many guys that are putting up crazy statistics, and so it's all relative. But from his MVP season back in 2019-2020, he was MVP in 2018-19 and 2019-20. And in 2018-19, he averaged 27.7 points per game, 12.5 rebounds. In 2019-20, he averaged 29.5 points per game, 13.6 rebounds. This year, he's averaging 32.5 points per game, 12.5 rebounds. It's insane. And he's become, I take for granted is the wrong word, right? But we are almost, in some respects, just because of how consistent he's been doing this now for the last 6 years, going on 6 years, he has been this level of player, and he's doing it night after night, game after game. Every time Giannis is on the court, he's giving it his all. He's playing his ass off. And it's just kind of become where we just expect this level of dominance. We just expect this level of dominance on both ends of the floor with Giannis. I'm considering myself fortunate as a basketball fan to be able to see him doing this in the prime of his career. And it's so much fun. It's so much fun to watch him. And I think that you're right, exactly right, with where you have him slated currently and what his projection looks like into the future.
So speaking of players with absurd statistical resumes and players that are also to some degree, I think, underappreciated, Nikola Jokic, winner of the last 2 MVPs, 4 All-NBA appearances, 3 firsts, 1 second. It's just crazy to think that he's a 7-foot center and he no question has the best passing ability in the league. You can make a strong case he is the best player in the league and has been for, really 2 or 3 years now. So, John, like Giannis, do we think Jokic has a similar ceiling? Do we think he could break into the Pantheon one day?
I think when I saw that you compared him to Moses Malone, it made me dive into the statistical comparisons and really sit with that kind of premise of, okay, is this guy Moses Malone? But Jokic is 27 years old. He turns 28 February, coming up here really soon. But this is technically the way that the NBA counts it, his 27-year-old season. In his 8th year, Jordan, he won his first championship at 27 in his 7th season. LeBron, he was 27 when he won his first title. It was his 9th season. Giannis, 26th in his 8th season. So I like the comparison you did to Moses Malone. And maybe I'm wrong for this opinion, but Malone feels like someone whose greatness has and continues to be lost to history. Our generation, when we think back on guys like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, he wasn't as great as them. Dr. J wasn't as good as Moses, but he was flashier and he has more highlight plays that we grew up watching. He wasn't Kareem. And towards the middle and end of his prime, there was MJ and guys that brought a lot more attention, who have had more staying power in the basketball culture than Moses Malone has. But this man from the 1978-79 season through the 1984-85 season, so 7 years, he averaged 25.9 points and 14.8 rebounds per game. And I think about the run that Jokic is on right now. Because of Jokic's unexpected rise to greatness, because of where he plays out in Denver, because he hasn't made it to the finals yet, because of all the unbelievable other players that are in the league right now, similar to Moses, that are either better, however you want to classify that, sexier, more ball dominant, or quite honestly, just have more marketability than Nikola Jokic has. LeBron, Durant, Giannis, Tatum's entering that category, Luka. To me, the best aspect of the Malone Jokic comparison I see is that 30 years from now, similar to how my dad speaks so fondly about Moses Malone, but I never think to categorize him as a great along the lines of Bird, Magic, or Jordan, et cetera, from that era. I see and could see this easily playing out the same way with Nikola Jokic to our kids 30 years from now too. This guy was the best big passer we've ever seen. This guy was statistically dominant. And our kids go, well, he wasn't Kevin Durant. He wasn't LeBron James. He wasn't Giannis. He wasn't Luka Doncic. Like, okay, cool. Here's this great player who has this great statistical profile. But I see Jokic being lost to history in some respects, unless he's able to win, more championships or continue to perform at this level above and beyond other people, similar to the way that Moses Malone has been, in my perspective.
Yeah. I mean, and if Jokic wins a championship or multiple titles for Denver, there will be no doubt he is like the face of that franchise, the signature guy. Whereas even though Moses Malone was the best player on the Sixers championship team, you made a great point. He was overshadowed by the flashier, Dr. J. And that was a really stacked team in general that kind of ran through the league. Like, if Denver's going to win this year, they're a very good team. They're not like a historically dominant team. He's going to have like a put the team on my back type moment in the playoffs, probably throughout the playoffs, right? And speaking of the playoffs with Jokic, like Embiid, I think he's been a bit snake bitten as far as his resume too. Like, we basically, both of his MVP seasons were basically lost as far as I'm concerned. Like all of his best teammates got injured. He was running in the playoffs with like Austin Rivers and like Facundo Campazzo. You know what I mean? He had literally no chance. And so who knows how deep of a run he could have already made with a little bit better luck. So I am very happy to see that he has quality wings around him. He's got a great number 2 in Jamal Murray. I am very interested to see if he can get over the hump and make the finals this year.
As we sit right now, who else would you take over them in the West, right? You'd say Denver. To me, I would say Denver.
Yeah, I mean, up until last night, I can't write off the Warriors, but I think Steph injured his knee. I wasn't watching the game, but I saw he's getting an MRI. So if that's serious, that obviously takes them out of the picture. And yeah, other than Golden State, I mean, I like Denver over everyone in the West. We'll talk about Memphis a bit when we get to the Ja piece, but the one thing with Jokic is he get his defense, especially in playoff scenarios, gets criticized. I think Nate Duncan, who's a NBA personality on Twitter, he often criticizes Jokic's defense and makes the claim that you can't win in the playoffs with him because people think you can spread him out, pull him out of the paint, get by him easily right off the dribble. We saw the Warriors do it to them in round 1 last year, but I think they have better pieces around him on the wing to, defend some of those great perimeter players, which will hopefully take some of that rim protection burden off of Jokic a bit. And I think he's a good enough defender, like Dirk was. I keep bringing up Dirk, but like Dirk was not a lockdown defender. He was just good enough if you had the right pieces around him. I think Jokic can be similarly effective, and I think their offense just has such a high ceiling that it might not matter.
I think that this is the year that we can start fairly judging his performance in the playoffs, assuming that they can get there, relatively healthy. The last few years, whether it be the Suns or the Warriors or whoever, there felt like there was teams, the Lakers, that you knew were better. You knew that the Nuggets were at a disadvantage, and especially with the injuries, that just made it insurmountable to where we could see Jokic be great or have great statistical performances and not hold it against him that his team wasn't advancing. This is the year where, to me, if they do not advance, if they're not able to make it to the finals, if they don't, at least make the Western Conference Finals, they're not running away with it. I think it's a 4 or 5 game lead as of this morning in the West, but they are very likely to get the 1 seed, which is going to be an advantage having to play in the altitude in Denver. And if they are not able to advance, then I think we can start saying, okay, there might be some issues here. But
yeah, it's a great point. Let's pivot over to Devin Booker. He's a guy who made this list that I think a lot of people are probably going to be surprised by. So he made first team All NBA last year. That's what got him on the list. He made the 2021 NBA Finals where the Suns lost to Giannis, like we just talked about. But if you put his resume up with like a Ray Allen or a Reggie Miller type historically great guard, he's surpassing them to me at this moment. He's even more of a go-to volume scorer. He's more of a playmaker. And you can't say he hasn't done it on winning teams. They made the finals. They were 64-18 last year before they collapsed in the playoffs. This guy's legit. But I feel like I might have gotten a little carried away with saying he was a level 3 ceiling type in my article. I'm very curious to get your thoughts on him, John.
Yeah, I think you did. I think you did. He feels forgettable to me. I like and enjoy watching Devin Booker play. I think that they had a window the last 2 years where they could have won the championship. Ultimately, he couldn't overcome Giannis 2 years ago. And last year, you already mentioned their massive collapse. But he feels forgettable to me in an era where everybody can get buckets. It's never been easier for you to score points. He's a great scorer, but there's no inherent trait where I go, this guy's considerably better than everybody else in the league. And so to me, there's nothing that stands out to him as far as being memorable. And I think that as we continue to go on into history, I think that his window of opportunity for being the best player on a championship team may have already come and went, which feels ridiculous in some ways to say. But there's other guys that we've talked about and that we're going to talk about that I think are just better. And so I think that he's going to be one of those guys that will go, wow, he had a great career statistically, and it's just kind of unforgettable. Or excuse me, not unforgettable. It's kind of forgettable.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. I mean, he's only 26 years old, but it does feel like Chris Paul has always been the alpha on that team. And now that Chris Paul is starting to show some signs of wear and tear, especially so this season, and he's barely even been able to be on the court. You see Phoenix kind of falling down the standings, and like they don't really feel like a contender anymore. Now, if Booker comes back healthy, they are starting to play better ball lately. I would still consider them to be a wild card in the playoffs this year. But I agree with you. Like level 3, I think was a level too high. I do think he's a future Hall of Famer, though. I think guys with this type of resume, I think he's scored like over 25 points a game in like 5 or 6 straight seasons. So, I mean, the consistency at that age is really impressive. I think he could be a level 2 guy because if you think about shooting guards, he is definitely consistently a top 5 shooting guard to me. But if you were to ask me to wager on if he were to ever make another first team All-NBA again, I would wager he will not. And I think you would agree with me there. I mean, the guard position is so deep. You got to beat out Luka, Ja, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander has taken the next step this year. Donovan Mitchell. I didn't even mention Steph, and it feels like he made first team last year because there were some key injuries at that position. So I agree with you overall. I think you're keeping me honest there, and I got a little carried away with D-Book, but still think he's an awesome player. I mean, I appreciate the guy.
Do we think
any other thoughts on him?
Do we think that Vince Carter is going to be a Hall of Famer?
Probably, just because I don't really feel like the barometer for getting into the NBA Hall of Fame or the bar is like all that high anymore. I feel like if you make like
slightly different era, but Vince Carter was more explosive. But if you were to say how many points would Vince Carter, what would he look like in today's NBA, playing in his prime? I think he'd probably be scoring at a higher rate, maybe a little bit better. People would consider him to be better than Devin Booker. And, Vince Carter played for 20 some years. And, I think he'll probably be a Hall of Famer, but I don't have enough historical perspective to say he'll definitely be a Hall of Famer. I'd be surprised if Devin Booker has a better career than Vince Carter, is what I would say.
Yeah, Vince Carter was certainly more memorable, with the dunk contest, the Team USA performances, the athleticism in general. And what I like about Vince is he adjusted really well to being a role player late in his career. Yeah. He was damn good for the Magic as like a 4th or 5th man. And I always respect that from guys who, came into the league as like chosen one superstar types to be able to adjust like that. So could be where Booker's at in like 10 years. It'll be interesting to see. But let's get to my guy, my firstborn son, Jason Tatum, 2-time All-NBA, made the first team last year, the 3rd team in the 2020 to 2021 season. He hasn't even turned 25 yet. He made the finals last year. He's averaging almost 31 points per game this year. He actually might be over the 31-point mark at the moment. But, John, is Tatum the best forward in the game?
No, because he's not better than Giannis, and I would classify Giannis as a forward. But, fair enough. Gosh, I'm so impressed by him, man. I love Jason Tatum. I love watching him play. He's the one to me where I sort of throw my hands up trying to project forward his career, because if you told me that 5 years from now Tatum had led the Celtics to 3 titles, you might not be around because of all the heart attacks you would have had in the process of watching those 3 titles, but I'd be surprised, not shocked. And if you told me that he never won a title, I'd be surprised, but not shocked. Also, he's still 24. Like, what the hell? I love Jason Tatum. I love watching him play. I think his ceiling is as a guy who can lift both trophies. Like we talked about when Brian Windhorst made that comment. I think it was on Russillo's podcast about like, who could you envision lifting both trophies? And I could see Jason Tatum lifting both trophies. And I think that he's still so early in his career that the fact that he's even on this list, which really you can say that about all three of the next guys we're going to talk about. The fact that they're even on this list is just so impressive because they've already accomplished something at such a young age that's really difficult to do. But I have no clue how high his ceiling could hypothetically be, because I think he could be one of those dudes, like a really, really, really big time guy. And I also think that I could be feeling the same way about him that I feel about Devin Booker maybe in a few years if things don't continue to progress the way that it looks like they're progressing.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like the expectations are really, really high for Tatum and this Celtics team for a team that's led by two guys that haven't hit their prime yet. It's almost like they skipped a step because they've had already a lot of success early in their careers in the postseason. But with that success comes greater expectations. And this will be the first year they enter the playoffs where people are expecting finals or bust, right? Or at least like, a battle it out with the Bucks, 7-game series loss in the conference finals type year, like really favorites when it comes to title contention. But the thing with Tatum, I didn't put him as a Pantheon ceiling. I had him at level 4, just because I feel like there are always like 3 to 4 to, maybe even 6 or 7 superior players to him in today's league. But that being said, if he does get over the hump with the Celtics team, if he wins multiple titles, he's so durable. He's playing all the time. If he continues to stay healthy and just be on the court, continue to put the Celtics in like top 2 or 3 seed position in the playoffs and contend every year, I just think he's going to build up a great resume over the next 10 years. It's going to be undeniable, To me, he's well on his way to surpassing like a Tracy McGrady or Paul Pierce type of player. The question is, can he get to like Kevin Durant's ceiling? I would say probably not, but like the fact that you can even potentially imagine it, it's pretty cool.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
So let's get to Luka. He's already made 3 All-NBA first teams. He's going to make a 4th this year. I guess he got hurt recently, but I think his statistical resume this year is ridiculous. I think he's at like 34, 8 rebounds and 8 assists. He's averaging 27 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists in his career so far. So other than LeBron, I mean, I can't remember anyone in my lifetime producing like this at this young of an age. So do we actually, you alluded to Embiid. I think you said Embiid having a higher ceiling than anyone on this list. To me, it was Luka having the highest career ceiling. A lot of that's because he's one of the younger players and has a lot more years ahead of him. But do you want to walk back that comment earlier, or do you see him as having a little bit lower of a ceiling than Embiid?
So I will walk back that comment, considering that I'm looking at my notes right here, and my first sentence says Luka has the highest ceiling, which is hilarious. But the point that I did want to make is I do think his floor is also lower than maybe some would say based on the way he started his career. And so much about this conversation that we're having, or about where players fit into tiers, is about perception, right? Like it ultimately revolves around perception. It's not necessarily what you actually produce statistically. It's what do you produce statistically? How much does it translate to winning? How many championships did you win? How do you compare to the other people of your era, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Luka's incredible. Game-winning shots, unbelievable stat lines, playoff success already. He's unguardable in so many ways. And he also, Raja Bell described him this week as like a sensei, like level master Jedi that can see the floor in ways that not very many people can, right? Like LeBron can do it and Luka can do it. And there's really not that many other people that can break down a defense and think 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 steps ahead of the action the way that Luka can. But what I wonder is how many more years of this stand around and watch offense will he participate in before people get bored of it in the same way that they did with James Harden. And the Harden and Luka comparison, I know that some people are saying it because of the way that it looks. And I do think that there is some element of fairness to that. I also think that James Harden, with, the rumblings about how he would get out of shape and the partying and all that type of stuff, it's unfair to say that Luka is going to be that, even though that they're has been some element of, did Luka come in out of shape at different times throughout his early career? But like, where would James Harden fall on this list? In the 50s, in the 60s?
Maybe higher, man. I mean, his
Maybe
statistical
higher, but
resume,
like,
he's almost like Karl Malone, right? Where a lot of
it's
people
hard to
who
say.
actually want.
Yeah, but Karl Malone did it for a way longer period of time than Harden did, right?
True.
And it's okay. So, but let's even say Karl Malone, like, that's Luka's floor. Is James Harden is Luka's floor? If you said he could end up in that range, projecting his career forward, that might be seen as blasphemous, knowing what we all think, hope, expect to see out of him for the rest of his career. But it is going to be really hard for him to win a championship, playing as ball dominant as he has been. Like let's think about the news this week of Kyrie requesting a trade. And I start thinking about, how would Kyrie fit on the Mavericks? Like, he would make them a better team, right? He would probably take over the Spencer Dinwiddie role, but would Kyrie still be as good of a player without having the ball in his hands as much as he does, or has the potential to, with Luka having the ball in his hands 40% of the time? I don't know. It's just hard to build a team around Luka, in my opinion, that's actually going to be able to win a championship. And that's going to lead to wherever we deem him perception wise at the end of his career.
Yeah. At the same time, the greatest of the great players, like MJ, LeBron, they brought a level of like ball dominance to their games, but they were such maestros, right? Such basketball geniuses that they could kind of control every part of the floor like a chessboard. I feel like Luka has that potential to be that kind of singular guy where it doesn't even necessarily matter that he's not the best like off-ball movement type of player like Steph. Like, he can just, manipulate everything on the court to his will, like bend it to his will. And yeah, he's going to need a secondary star. Jalen Brunson played the role well last year. I think if he had someone a little bit better than that, not Kyrie, just because who wants to deal with that nonsense these days, but someone like that who'd be willing to kind of say, okay, it's my turn now. Like Dwayne Wade, right? That's kind of how Dwayne Wade was playing with LeBron. I think you can win a championship with Luka if you give him that type of, secondary star. It's going to be very interesting because nothing feels impossible to me from his like ceiling standpoint. Like, could he be the all-time leading scorer one day? Doesn't sound impossible. How many MVPs could he win? 4 or 5? Like, I think that could happen for sure. Will it? We're going to have to wait and see, but this is a projection exercise. And to me, his individual ability is one of the most special things I've ever seen. I'd put it up there with LeBron's at the end of the day. Now, the difference between him and LeBron to me is LeBron has been the most durable athlete we've ever seen in any sport, pretty much, besides maybe Tom Brady. I'm not going to ever put the expectation on Luka that he matches that level of durability. Like, he doesn't really strike me as a cryo chamber type of guy. Like, Luka is more of like I'm hitting the vape, drinking some beers, playing some video games in the off season. That's the kind of vibe I get from Luka. But on the other hand, his game doesn't rely on like freakish athletic ability too, right? It's very much like a change of pace type deal, right? Like almost like a Chris Paul. And we've seen how well Chris Paul's game has aged. The biggest problem is Chris Paul's smaller. Luka's a tank. So I could see his game aging really, really well. Like, if he's still doing this at like 36 years old, I would not be shocked. And then you got to think, okay, that's like how many more years? 13 more years of this type of Luka. Who knows what he can achieve in that period of time.
I think it's very fair.
Let's get to our last guy, though. So Ja Morant, he made this list by making the All-NBA second team last season. He's the youngest player on the list. He's already the leader of a top 5 team in the league. I'd put him up there with Derrick Rose and Russell Westbrook as like the type of guys we'll be watching on YouTube dunk compilations until the end of time. But for all the early accolades, all the success, can he be the best player on a championship team as a smaller guard? John?
I think it remains to be seen. I wrote my piece about Ja last year, leading the Grizzlies to unprecedented heights, the same way that Derrick Rose had revitalized the Bulls franchise. I love Ja. If you talk about my 3 favorite players to watch, to root for, it's Ja, it's Giannis, and it's Dame. How does Ja's game age? You just talked about how Luka's game could age very favorably. That's something that's not really talked about in public discourse because he's so young, but in a career ceiling type of conversation, can he maintain this level of play as he ages? You would have said Russ was on his way. You would have said D Rose was on his way. Both stopped and fell very far short. So what I really wanted to do with this specifically was I wanted to say how many undersized guards are there in the Pantheon top 25, top 30 level of Bill Simmons' list. And his updated top 25 list that he did in 2020, which was a little bit of a better comparison because, for example, it has Steph on there. But on that list, how many of these people would classify as, undersized guards? Jerry West, Oscar Robertson was 6'5", but, he was a ball dominant guy. There was Bob Cousy, and then there was Steph. So it was just 4 guys. Isaiah and John Stockton were both right on the fringes of that conversation. But, anywhere between 4 and 6 guys on that list that you'd classify as point guards undersized out of the top 30 or so. And none of them, if you just think about all those guys that I just named, West, Oscar, Isaiah, Stockton, Cousy, Steph, none of them were on there because of unbelievable athleticism. They were on there because of other traits and skills that contributed to them being elite winning players. It's hard to say how Ja's game will age because every other person that we've seen that has a remotely similar skill set, including John Wall, who I think John Wall is not remotely the level of conversation that even Russ and Derrick Rose were at their peaks, but none of the games have aged well. None of them have.
Right.
And so I'm rooting for Ja, but I think that he needs to have his success early in his career. I think that his window is shorter than we might think because everybody else, until proven otherwise, everybody else that has a game similar to his has fallen off faster than you would have expected.
Yeah, it's true. If you don't have the perimeter game to rely upon when you lose that athletic step, we've seen players like that really take a nosedive in their careers. Like, it's a harsh term, but that's what I describe what I've seen out of like Russell Westbrook these last couple of years. And he was incredible in his prime. I like that you mentioned Isaiah Thomas as like the all-time like small guy leading a team to multiple championships in his case. And when I watch the Grizzlies, I almost feel like Ja is trying to be Isaiah Thomas and the Grizzlies are trying to be the bad boy Pistons. And like, I don't know if it really fits them, right? Like, they get so caught up in like kind of being villainous. They start that, I guess Shannon Sharp started it, but like, I don't know. They're just getting in a lot of incidents lately. Like Dylan Brooks is playing this like Bill Laimbeer villain role. He punched Donovan Mitchell in the nuts. He gets in fights with people sitting courtside. Like, and I just feel like a team like Memphis, I like when they lean into the more positive aspects of what they have going on. How they're all young. They all seem like they're great friends. They play the game with a lot of pace and joy and excitement. Like, I like when they lean into that more than when they try this whole like bad boys, 2.0 thing. And I just don't know. I don't think Ja is ready to be like that Isaiah Thomas type of leader yet. I'm very impressed that he's in the position he's in right now, leading a team that's this successful at this young of an age. Like, I have really high hopes for the type of leader he can become. But I think he's making comments to the media like, we're not scared of anyone in the West. Like, when does that ever turn out well? Like, to me, they could make the finals this year, but the moment he said that, I felt like their chances of making the finals went down just because we don't see that type of, cockiness almost, play out, like work out for the player a lot of the time. So I think he has to mature some. His team has to mature some. Can he hold up athletically in time for that maturity to really kick in? And then we might see a guy who, as you alluded to, Brian Windhorst said, could be holding 2 trophies at the end of the year, finals MVP and the NBA title. So I'm very interested in where Ja's career goes from this point. I love watching him play. Out of anyone on this list, he might excite me the most, just as an individual talent.
You never know what you're going to get. On any given night, he could be dunking on somebody from the free throw line, right? Yeah. Or jumping and catching the ball on a layup off the backboard. He's electric.
Ridiculous, man.
I love him.
So we got through all the 7 players on the list. I think maybe before we wrap, very quickly, I just want to touch on a few guys that I believe will be involved in this type of conversation in the next couple of years. And I want this to be like a recurring thing that, we revisit maybe every few years. But in my article, I had Zion, I had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Donovan Mitchell, Jaylen Brown, and Anthony Edwards as guys who I feel like could make this type of, projection Hall of Fame type list in the future. My question to you, John, is there anyone you would add to it? Because in hindsight, I think I missed one player in particular, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
When I read through it the first time, there wasn't anybody that stood out to me, but I'd be curious to hear who you thought you missed.
Yeah, I would add Tyrese Halliburton.
Interesting.
Because he's 22 years old and he's already averaging 20 points and 10 assists. And he's clearly making his teammates better. When he was healthy, his team was hovering around the playoff picture. A team everyone thought was going to be terrible in the Pacers.
Myself included. I already lost money on their under. They already have gotten over their over-under.
Everyone said that team's tanking for Wembanyama. Halliburton didn't let that happen. I mean, I think he's already a winning player, and he's kind of growing into that leader type position like Ja is. So I think he's a guy that could make a first or second team All-NBA in the next few years, and then he's going to be included in this type of conversation.
That's a really good one.
I had one more this is a crazy long shot. I don't think this will actually happen, but fresh off a Reddit conspiracy, I put Jaren Jackson Jr. as well. He's only 23. He's he's the front runner for Defensive Player of the Year, defensive anchor on the Grizzlies, who we've talked about being one of the best teams in the league. I just feel like if that team ever gets over the hump and wins a championship, and he's that, legendary Draymond type defender for them, that he's going to make all NBA teams. Even if you don't think of him that way right now, he's still very young. So he was another guy that I would throw on there. Like, if we're going to throw Jaylen Brown on there, why not Jaren Jackson Jr.?
I will be honest. I had not given a shred of consideration to Jaren Jackson Jr. I'm going to make sure, and I would like for him to just stay out of foul trouble in an important playoff game before I consider thinking about him from a pyramid all-time statistical type of deal. But the Reddit conspiracy.
But it was a long shot.
The one, or there's 2 guys that you mentioned that I just want to add comment on. Zion. CJ McCollum's on Draymond's podcast the other day talking about, what was his messaging to Zion when he was getting to know him and trying to encourage and empower him and lead him when he joined the Pelicans. And, CJ's comment to Zion was, I'm maximizing the most that I have in me as CJ McCollum. You have a ceiling that is unique and unlike just about every other person in this league. You need to be doing everything you can to maximize your opportunity, to maximize your career. You don't want to look back on this and have regrets. And I think that there's a lot of truth in that. Zion is the guy that is such a question mark because of his health problems. We all know that. We also watch him when he's out on the court and we see the ceiling that he can reach. And the other guy is Anthony Edwards. If, I look at SGA, Donovan Mitchell, Jaylen Brown, they're all really nice players. Jaren Jackson Jr., nice player. Halliburton, I think your point about Halliburton being a winning player was really good. I hadn't even thought about that, but you think about somebody like John Stockton or other guys that are on this list, Halliburton, if he continues in the trajectory, maybe so. Anthony Edwards is the type of guy that, why can't the guy score 30 plus and be a first team All-NBA guy that leads somebody to a title? The guy's 21, 22 years old. He's so mature for his age. And you watch him at times and you go, this guy is a bucket getter on a level that is very elite and rare category. We talked about Devin Booker, we talk about Tatum, and Anthony Edwards is the guy that I could say Yeah, if you told me that he had a better career than those guys, it wouldn't shock me. If you told me the SGA or Donovan Mitchell or Jaylen Brown ended up as guys that were better than any one of the 7 on the list that we talked about above, I would be pretty shocked. If you told me that Anthony Edwards ended up being better than the 7 guys above or any of the 7 guys above individually, it would not shock me, because I think his ceiling is the highest. But he may also, with the situation that he's in, have the most going against him early in his career. So we'll see. But I just wanted to add that to the discussion.
No, you pretty much hit on every point I would have made about either player. Like Zion this year had some moments where he put the Pelicans on his back. We've seen how they've collapsed without him. He just needs to stay healthy. And sadly, I don't have a lot of confidence in that happening after what I've seen so far. Anthony Edwards, the guy just has it. You know what I mean? Like that unspoken it factor. He has it. I don't think he's going to be long for Minnesota. Like, I hate to say it. I love when a player like him is playing for a franchise like that. But like that Gobert trade was so destructive to that team's long-term health that I think, he might not be saying it out loud yet, but ultimately I think that will ruin that franchise's relationship with Ant-Man. So when he gets on a better franchise that surrounds guys, surrounds players around him that make more sense, sky's the limit. But anyways, I mean, I think that's all we had planned. We're like right under an hour, which I'll take. I said 45 minutes or less going in, but
we'll take it.
I will take it.
We're long-winded. We're trying to be better, but this is about getting reps, man. This is about us getting reps and having phone conversations, just recording our phone conversations in a lot of respects.
No doubt.
Things that we talk about anyways. So I thought your article was fantastic. It was a really interesting topic. I thought you did a great job of attacking it. It was fun to read, and I love doing stuff like this with you, man. This was fun. Appreciate
it, man. Did you want to plug anything you got going on right now?
No, not really. I'm currently building a business that is college sports centric. We're just working in the shadows right now. We've actually had a lot of success, relatively speaking. We launched officially 2.5 months ago, I think, just because of the fiscal year. Our official business date in registration purposes was January 2nd, but we're having a lot of success in the early going, and we're really excited about what we're doing. I think we're really onto something. We found our niche in some regards that we actually might be better than anybody else in the world at being able to provide and facilitate for other college sports creators. So one of these episodes in the future, when we're talking either about college sports or either about something NBA or, we'll see, we might touch on a little bit more, but really excited about what we're doing.
Yeah, man. And knowing you, you're not going to be working in the shadows for long. I got the utmost faith in you, brother. But as for everyone listening to this, if you have time, go to our Substack, check out some of our articles, click.substack.com, clic.substack.com. At worst, if you subscribe, you'll get an email every now and then with a 10-minute piece to read. And, if you leave it unread, if you click into it, we appreciate that too.
We appreciate all 20 of you. Yeah, we appreciate all 20
of you. We're nobodies, but we're trying to get better. We're really passionate about this stuff. So just remember, someday we might be somebody. So
and they're going to look back on this, our first time using StreamYard, our first time video recording ourselves, and they're going to go, damn, that's where it all started.
A historic moment.
Very historic moment.
All right, John. Thanks for the time, man. Take care.